I'm Ken Duckworth. It's great to be here, and I want to thank the 250 people for joining our conversation. So as you know, this book is a celebration of lived experience as expertise, and I am so honored to have written our first book. And let's see, what do the slides say? All I see is Jordan here. Oh, there we go. What I want you to know is that there are 400 pages of this book, and this is but one chapter. But I want to tell you something about this chapter. My family never figured out how to communicate about my dad's severe bipolar disorder, psychosis, hospitalizations, and terrifying moments. He was a very loving person. This is the reason I became a psychiatrist, because my family didn't have chapter 9. There was nobody that I could see that had solved for problems of communication. It's a great honor that we have 3 people from the book to talk about communication strategies. That squeaking noise in the background is my dog. I'm going to work on that in a bit. All right, next slide, please. It's very NAMI, isn't it? Obviously, you're hearing a story at any time. Remember, you are not alone. We have a helpline that serves 75,000 calls, texts, and chats. This helpline is open from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. It's staffed by about 250 volunteers who are in service to our shared mission of supporting people and reminding people you are not alone. Next slide, please. Hey, so here's our first book. Fun, huh? I always really wanted us to have a book, and I was so honored when I sent out requests for volunteers. What's different about this book is that there's 130 people who share their names and what they have learned. And somehow in the mental health books, and there's thousands of them, not one book, it could only be NAMI that did it this way. Not one book would ask real people what helped them communicate, what helped them problem solve, what helped them after dealing with adversity. How do they overcome things? How do they develop a way to help others? So it was a great honor to write this book. I want to acknowledge Jordan Miller was the world's greatest co-pilot, and she is working on the next airplane while I'm simply chatting about the book and doing a bunch of book events. All right, next slide, please. All right, so here's my 3 lived experience experts. These are all people who are in the book, and obviously in a book with 130 people. Jordan and I were in tears one day when we had sent a 600-page manuscript in, and the publisher said, yeah, that's not going to work. You have to cut all the quotes. So it came down to 400, and we took people's best, most essential, beautiful quotes. But this is a chance for 350 of you to talk to the people in the book who stepped forward to model how they communicate. So I want to say I developed the Ask the Expert about 15 years ago. It was the so-called Friday phone call with Dr. Ken. This was on one phone line. I had Marsha Linehan and 900 people, and dogs would be barking, and people would be doing their dishes. It couldn't have been more chaotic and beautiful, because I was bringing the best researchers and thinkers in America to us. Then along the way, people at NAMI figured out how to make it into a webinar. Then Jordan Miller exists. So now you have this beautiful production, and there's a whole group of people behind them that I want to thank and acknowledge to make this happen. So I want to say in my 15 years of doing Ask the Expert, Dante and Chastity Murry are the first married couple in the history of Ask the Expert. So what they're going to do is they're going to talk about their experience of family communication, what they've learned. And then my friend George Kaufmann, that's apparently his high school picture. That I was just told. Nice tie too. People don't even wear ties. I don't think I can find a tie. So we're going to start with Dante and Chastity. They're going to discuss their strategies. George is going to discuss what he learned, particularly in the family to family program. I want to invite you to have questions. You know, NAMI is all about learning, supporting, and listening to each other. You can, of course, also ask me about the book. What's it like to write a book? Am I ever going to recover from writing the book? All these questions. How many books have we sold? How do you get one? We can do all of that in the chat as well. But I want to thank you for joining us. This book is incredibly important to me. I wanted NAMI to have a book, and I wanted the book to be exactly this. I've met so many amazing people at the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I wanted their stories to be real in a book that doesn't have a bunch of typos. It doesn't look like I printed it on a mimeograph machine in my basement. It's a real publisher, Molly Stern, who edited Michelle Obama's Becoming, Gone Girl, and The Martian. I mean, we're talking about the real deal here. And I've yet to get an email that there's a typo in the book. And I was told, oh, Ken, when you write a book, the first thing will happen is you'll get an email, page 88 has a typo, and then you'll look at page 88 and there's a different typo. And this speaks to Jordan and Alexis Zielinski, my teammates, who worked very, very hard to make this happen. So we just hit 400 people. How fun is that, this beautiful little community? Chastity, Dante, I want you to take this away and let's have a conversation about what you've learned in communication with each other and how you learned it. Take it away.
All right. First off, my wife and I want to give a kudos and thanks to you and your staff. Yes. We appreciate this opportunity to speak with everybody and this huge number of folks here joining on the webinar. This is a great privilege. I want to make introductions to my wife, Chastity. She want to say something?
Hey. Nice to meet everyone. The book has been, for us and our friends, our family, such an honor. It's been an honor to our families, are proud of us, and it's just such a good feeling to be able to help people. Absolutely.
And the book speaks for itself. You're not alone. It says the NAMI Guide to what? Navigating mental health.
Right.
And so we are grateful to be a part of this this journey. You know, it's a privilege to be a part of this and share our personal stories, especially as a married couple.
Yes.
And what makes it even more unique, Dr. Duckworth, is that we're an interracial couple dealing with the mental health issues and advocacy that we do together. It's interesting, our backstory is about how we met. We kind of put that in a bio a little bit, how we met at Frankfort, Kentucky.
Right.
And I had a speech at the Rotunda.
And I was there talking to the legislators.
And we knew about Phyllis.
Yes.
And she was kind of like one of the cupids that kind of let us connect, you know?
Yes.
And so I was really nervous. I saw this beautiful woman here and I was like, oh my gosh, I got this presentation at the Rotunda. And then she's going to be there to hear me speak. And so I kind of turned on my GQ cap, you know, started talking and didn't want to make a mistake and, you know, convinced her to give me her number and her email indirectly because I said I do trainings for Interim Voice, I do trainings for Connection. And if you want to have some of those opportunities with NAMI Louisville, I'll be more than willing to help you, you know, be a part of the trainings, you know, so help me to have more communication with her, which is a great way to do it. At least in my opinion. Did it work for you?
NAMI as meet cute, right? Fantastic.
This is better than Tinder, okay? So she's a wonderful woman, you know? So we met through Frankfort, Kentucky, and
we sure did.
The rest is history. So
she's
given me the opportunity and the blessings to be in her life. And it's been great.
We've had our ups and downs, I will say that. Because you're both dealing with mental health issues. And of course, also I have a son that's autistic.
Yep.
So that's another thing we have to throw into the mix.
Yeah.
So with that, you know, when we get upset with each other, we try to be kind and caring, supportive. And if someone needs to walk away and come back to the problem, that's what we do.
Yeah.
So that nobody says something mean or hurtful to each other. Because when you do that, you can't take it back.
It's like toothpaste. Once it's out the tube, you can't put it back.
Exactly.
Right?
So
Go for it.
Okay. So that's what we do. And, you know, if we need to sit down and have a check-in, that's what we do in the morning or whatever time of the day is best for us. Yeah. We have a check-in.
Yeah. Now, we did read that book on love languages.
Yes, we sure did.
We did that. Now, is it practice 100% of the time?
No.
No, our batting average is not that great, but I'm in the baseball, so our batting average is what, 200, 300, something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
We do use some
if you can keep it up.
Yeah, if we live long enough. So we both are dealing with similar diagnoses of mental health, bipolar disorder, depression,
borderline,
anxiety.
also.
You know, so we try to be merciful with each other about who took medicine and who didn't. So,
Right. And that's what I do.
like,
I do check-in. I do a
What do you
check-in.
mean
do
by
that.
that?
Every morning, I ask my son, have you taken your meds? Dante, have you taken yours? And of course, I ask myself, have you
Yeah.
taken yours?
Okay.
she asked herself, did she take her meds?
But
So anyway,
yeah, that's a joke.
Yeah,
But
we add a
anyway.
little sense of humor to
We
our
do.
relationship. You know, in fact, it's one of the 12 principles that we go through.
Yes.
You know, we recognize each other's pain and struggle. And we also add a little humor when it's balanced to some of the situations we get in. So it's not goofy over the top.
Right.
Some of the stuff we deal with are situational comedies as relates to the principles of support.
Yes.
It's a structured program that we use. I'm making a transition, guys. I'm kind of making a segue into our support groups that we do.
Yes.
And the family support group is one of our flagships that we use to teach and facilitate courses that help our community. Now, the first one is Family Support Group, FSG. The second is NAMI Connection. We do that once a week for family support. We do it once a week for NAMI Connection.
Right.
And so Zoom is a wonderful tool, as we can see today, a wonderful tool for connecting with a lot of people and sharing the fidelity program designed by NAMI National.
Yes.
And so, did you want to show them some of the principles?
I can go over some of the principles if you guys want.
Yeah. Because they might not know about the
as
principles.
they relate to your successful marriage.
Yeah.
Yes, they relate to it.
You're
do.
our first married couple in the 15-year history of Ask the
That's
Expert.
right.
So
Okay.
people want to know, how do
Embrace
you do
humor is
it?
healthy, Doc.
Yeah. So
Embrace humor is healthy.
Because we have a time limit. Do you want to pick one that you want?
Embrace humor is healthy.
Embrace humor. Now,
That's definitely one of mine.
Here's the one that we kind of embrace in our group.
Yes.
If someone does not bring their principal support, they know in our support group, the last one is what?
We
will never give up hope.
And
Yes.
that's how we feel with each other.
Yeah.
In our marriage. We never give up.
Sometimes we're like Italians and we're like talking to each other.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, we follow the scripture, do not go to bed angry.
Angry.
And so those are good principles, good advice that we follow.
Our spiritual is another thing too.
That helps.
It does.
As it relates to family and communications. I know we're in a section called communication strategies.
Yes.
So if you look at the back of the book and you are not alone, there's a section called communication strategies. And there we talk about how we remind each other, how we look out for each other.
Yes.
And that's the big picture, mutual respect. Sometimes we express ourselves, and it's like any couple. You know, I have never met a perfect couple that does not have some kind of issue to talk about. But the principle of the matter is, at the end of the day, are you trying to make peace? Are you trying to follow the basic principles of a relationship to be successful? You know, we want to plan to succeed, not plan to fail.
Right.
And so there's some basic ideas that we use to help ourselves out.
Right.
And being an interracial couple, that is a challenge sometimes, and how we function outside of the household and things like that. It's to be expected. So
and coping skills is something that we have to use.
Yeah, we find ways to manage that.
Yes. Yeah. With each other, we do coping skills with each other, and then we have our own that we work with.
Yep. I think I'm one of your biggest cheerleaders.
I want to ask one open-ended question. How is being an interracial couple a challenge that you use NAMI taught coping skills for?
Language.
I'm
going to tell you that one.
Language.
Because you got to understand each other. I come from a different culture, different words. As it relates to communication strategies, like we are in this section of this book, and how we use basic concepts from NAMI National, using like love languages is a great tool, a great foundation for marriage relationships. But the next level up, on a collegiate level, is learning colloquialisms, is learning how each of us express ourselves culturally. And when you learn those kind of things, the communication is better and improved. I'm gonna give you an example, guys. I grew up in a household where I never used fixin'. I never used the word fixin' because fixin' means I'm going to fix something broke outside, fix the lawnmower, put some more oil in the lawnmower, fix the car, fix the carburetor, change the filter in the car. But she says fixing, like one on a date, you fix something here. She says, I'm fixing something to eat. I said, fixing something. fixing something to eat. Yeah, just fixing it. She used fixing in different ways. So that's one example, a fun example what we have.
Right.
But I did learn some wisdom though, how I call the countryside, E-Town's countryside to me. But I learned this, guys. I said, we had a power outage. I don't know if anybody knows about this, and we had some bad rains. And I said, God willing, the creek don't rise. And I said to myself, that sounds familiar. And so my wife say, God willing, the creek don't rise. I hope we have some food in this house because electricity is out. So I'm fixing to go get something.
So you're using each other's language, right?
That's right.
We do. Since we've gotten married,
Yeah.
we have caught on to that. And we literally sometimes will talk about the same exact thing.
Yeah.
And answer each other's sentences.
Yeah,
I've done that before.
We're at the point where we finish each other's sentences and yep.
Finish and answer.
Yep. Yeah, we're like Wonder Twin powers activate. If anybody's familiar with the DC Super Friends.
Could you describe when you're facing a challenge? Let's say one of your symptoms are active, or both of your symptoms are active at the same time. This would, of course, be, a high stress moment for all of us. What have you learned to manage that? Because you described a couple things you did in our interview, which, of course, you can't put everything in the book. But I wanted people to be able to learn a little bit from you.
I think today was probably a prime example of communication and balancing out how to de-escalate. The big word of the day is de-escalation.
Yes.
And some of the ways to de-escalate a situation is to say, I need to step back, sit on the porch, sit in a chair, kind of get some fresh air, get a chance to meditate, rethink. Another way that we've found is sometimes I need to go for a walk, and that active walk around the block allows me to, walk to the park and back. Okay. And during that time period, get a chance to reflect, get a chance to think about some things, and come back, refresh with, okay, I think I know what we need to do. And I talk to my partner.
Same as me. I do the same thing. We both walk. Power walk, I do.
Yeah. And our best conversations, guys, are when we walk.
Yes. That's one
of the things we've done to improve our relationship with communication.
Yes.
And it's just a wonderful tool to be out there and be in the elements to get that walk in. It's been really useful, especially when the weather's changed for the better.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we do. And then, like I said, separately, when we have a problem and we can't fix the problem, then I'll call my therapist and say, okay, what do I need to do if we're in a situation like this? And she'll let me know what I need to do.
Yeah.
So, but most of the time, we've never had a problem like that.
Yeah.
And I see a therapist every week.
Yeah.
So, and Dante sees one, I think, every week or every 2 weeks?
I need to see one every week. But anyway, I see him once a month. So my insurance won't let me do it once a week.
Because I'm going through grieving counseling as well as trauma as well.
But we do keep in touch with our therapists and clinicians. We advise everyone in this support group to stick with their therapist, stick with their doctors.
We do.
Take their medication like they're supposed to. And then do the best you can, find all the supplements. Spiritual supplement, we talked about communications. We talked about the basic principles from NAMI National to help us supplement some things. And the classes that we're able to teach, like Family to Family, are awesome for giving us the opportunity to get refreshers on how to deal with hot potatoes.
And connections.
And connections, yeah.
Definitely.
So the family support group has been a blessing for us to manage every Monday at 6 o'clock on Zoom.
Yes.
And so we've had some good turnouts, and we leave it open where people can call us or text us about some issues.
We do.
So it's been working out. It's been a blessing by God.
It has been. We have had so many people in our group.
Yeah.
I mean, and the connections group has been absolutely amazing.
Yeah. In fact, we got our mantra in the back here. It's called Live, Love, and Laugh. So.
Yeah.
So that's what we try to remind ourselves.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question. Chastity, you mentioned you were grieving and that was traumatic for you. And I wanted to ask how you communicate that in your marriage, because all of us on this call have experienced loss at one form or another and have all been grieving. And that can be a challenge because the people around us in some circumstances might say, well, you've had a week, or like, are you good to go now? Like, I'm done grieving.
Had that happen.
What?
Yeah.
That
I said I've
happened?
had that happen before with family. And my husband, though, he has tried to be as understanding as possible because he's not lost his mom or dad. So it's a whole different ball game with
Once
that.
you've experienced it, you never forget it. But you've been able to problem solve that too, because that can be a stress within a marriage. When one person's grief process is longer than the other person, or more complex than the other person might anticipate.
Yes, exactly.
So are there NAMI skills that you've used to appreciate that?
Yes, it is. Coping skills. I've used a lot of coping skills, and I aim for better coping skills. I have. I would say that one of the others is we cannot solve all problems. You know, I know my husband cannot solve all problems, and I have to realize that going through that grieving process and also dealing with depression and anxiety on top of it is extremely hard. But when you have someone in your life that will listen to you and that will be there for you, makes a huge difference, and that wants to understand you. If they don't want to understand you, it makes it hard. But if they do, then it makes it a whole lot easier.
Yeah. And when my wife shows me scriptures and things like that, that helps.
Yes.
Especially one that we went over before about love. Love believes all things, endures all things. And when you look at that particular scripture, and I'm just paraphrasing, it is something that's palatable to the ears. You're like, oh, that sounds great. Yes. But then when you get married, now you got to put that to practice. Now you got to find the principle behind the sayings to make it a reality. And I think that when her mother passed,
yes,
God rest her soul,
my mother was my best friend.
I met her, we talked. Yeah.
My mom was my best friend. And when I lost her, I lost a part of me. And I still have days where I grieve. And I don't, I asked my therapist this morning, I said, am I ever going to get to a point where I don't grieve as much? She said, it's different for everyone.
Yeah.
So, I keep trying to do that. And I'm like, I just have to go with it every day and do the best I can do. And that's all you can do.
Yeah. And another thing that helps us.
Go ahead, Dante.
Another thing that helps us out is this. I can provide her with empathy and sympathy, those two things, because I've lost a close friend of the family. I've lost uncles. I've lost cousins. Okay. And I also lost a son-in-law to suicide. He death by suicide is a term they want us to use now. And so with him having that kind of, loss and that kind of hurt in the family, I have empathy and sympathy for my wife.
Yes.
Like you said, Dr. Duckworth, there's a strain there on a death in the family, especially one so close like her mother.
Yeah.
And so to let people honestly know how I respond to that is, yes, I want to hear your concern. Yes, I encourage you to do your therapist thing. Yes, I want to build you up. And sometimes the grief can get so much that it affects me. And then I'm in a depressed grief mode and I don't want to go there all the time. And so as we apply the principles, we have to try to find ways to build other coping skills, to do other things that, like go for walks or go to see a movie that's a comedy.
Yeah.
We try to do things that balance out that conversation.
Yes.
So that
it tries to make me feel
that
better.
way it's not too much. I mean, dealing with a death conversation every day is going to be taxing on a relationship. I do give her affirmation. I do confirm. I do validate. In fact, that's one of the terms we use in family support group and in family classes. Yes. You validate the person's emotions and feelings because those are real. Those are lived experiences. So I validate her emotions. Say, I understand. I feel for you, and I can give you 5 minutes to dump on me, and then after that, let's go for a walk. After that, let's go do something encouraging.
Right.
After that, let's go do this. So I give her that time frame to give her that validation, and I want to hear it. but I just can't absorb it every day.
You're also setting a limit for how much capacity you have, and you've learned it's 5 minutes.
And
So what I
do the
want to
same
do
thing.
is thank the two of you. We're going to learn from George Kaufmann, who's another lived experience expert in the book. I want people, the 437 people on this call, I want you to think of questions they have for what is arguably NAMI's all-time class couple, right? How do they make their marriage work? And people are going to generate questions for you. We're going to come back. Some of the questions may apply to George and his experience with his son as well. So I'm not going to ask specific questions for you just yet. I want to give George the floor. I want to introduce George by saying, you know, I've been NAMI's medical director for many years. George would sit in the front at all the conventions, and he probably doesn't remember this. He would always ask good questions, always very attentive. And I had mentioned in passing that NAMI needed a book, and he said, we need our own book. George was one of the people who inspired me to just keep going, because NAMI wasn't ready for the book and the world wasn't ready at the time either. But I reached out to George. All the people fully participated. It's all optional. But because George had, you know, shown leadership and had actually encouraged me, I wanted to thank him, you know, in this forum. And I'm just so grateful that he took what he learned in Family to Family and shared it with other people, because Family to Family saves relationships. It happens every day. So George, in Santa Barbara, California, I'm sure it's sunny and 77. But I just want to thank you. And I think you might be on mute, my friend.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. First of all, I'm going to dispel the myths. It's not 77, it's about 55, and we're getting ready for the next rainstorm, you know. And we're going to be driving through it in a few minutes on our way to San Francisco. So anyway, I figured what I would do just to get things started is I'm going to give you a kind of a thumbnail sketch of sort of what our family history is. I'm going to come at it from a different perspective than our previous speakers here. But by the way, before we start, I want to recognize you guys are ambassadors for recovery. You really are. You're inspirational. And there's certain parts of what you say that sort of remind me, frankly, of my son and his wife. They're both peer support specialists, and they met on the job, you know, and got married and had a family, you know, together while Pat was completing his education. And so many of the things that you mentioned, you know, I've seen them practice as well. Not all of them, but some. Which is, you know, it's great. Everybody, you know, has to find their own way forward. And you guys do such a great job of, to me at least, of fulfilling what my son first said was his definition of recovery. And that was, recovery is when I have a life I want to live. And I said to him, what does that mean? You know, and he said, you know what it means. We want the same thing that anybody else in this world wants. We want a safe, comfortable place to live. We want a reason to get out of bed in the morning, and we want meaningful relationships. And I don't just mean friends, you know, romantic relationships. And so you guys are such a great example of that. So anyway, thank you for that. I'm going to give you the classic comic books version of our family's perspective, because it's going to give you a little bit of an idea of where we're coming from. So I'm going to talk about a slightly different perspective, that of a family member of someone living with a mental health condition. So our son was diagnosed in 1994 at the age of 20 with schizoaffective disorder. And shortly thereafter ensued what he now refers to as his, quote, lost decade. Because at that time, he was completely not on board with any sort of treatment or even acknowledgement of his disorder, which sadly, you know, is not all that uncommon. So what transpired was what usually transpires, and unfortunately, which was a bout of involuntary hospitalizations, which frankly further alienated him from care in a lot of ways, interrupted by times on the street, major substance use disorder, a couple of incarcerations. And about 9 years into it, finally sort of reluctantly accepted therapy. And everybody asked him, oh, why? What was the magic? You know, he said, well, frankly, it was just easier to go along with it. They finally wore me down, you know. And then when he did accept treatment, he found that he was able to function much better. And he found this, by the way, through another peer. So the one thing that I think that you guys represent is one of the most important and underappreciated aspects, frankly, of our whole mental health system, which is the potential impact of one peer on another. Patrick asked the question, how do I accept, you know, when I accept treatment, what does that mean? What's it going to get me? He was able to look at this other individual and say, he's got a lot of the same problems I do. He's, you know, had substance use problems. He's got hung with this mental health diagnosis. But the difference is he has a life I don't. Maybe I can have a life too. So that was kind of the beginning of his path to recovery. So when he finally accepted treatment, he improved somewhat, but not completely. It wasn't until he decided he wanted to get clean and sober that he really, it was like this veil lifted and there was this caring, sensitive person. So anyway, that allowed him to go on and become a certified peer specialist. He actually completed his education, graduated at Western Michigan University with a degree in family studies at age 43, and now works as a peer specialist in a first episode psychosis program in his community in Michigan. And so what have I learned from this journey as a family member about communication? The first and foremost thing that I just can't overemphasize is that it's all about relationships. You know, we have all these skills that we teach about how to communicate with people. None of them work until you as a family member, those of us that are family members, can connect with their ill relative in a way that builds trust. And unfortunately, many of us as family members, our primary focus seems to be on treatment of the illness rather than relating to the person. And I just can't emphasize enough how important it is to develop mutual respect, trust, empathy, and compassion. A lot of the same things you guys talked about in your relationship with each other. It works the same way between families and people that are living with mental health conditions in their families. And none of these communication skills are going to work very well until or unless we as family members focus on them. And the second sort of corollary to this, I guess, that we've learned is that you have to stop doing what you know doesn't work, you know. And when Millie and I were constantly at Patrick, well, are you feeling okay? Is everything all right? Did you take your meds today? It was stifling him, you know. And he already had, you know, serious questions about his future. And we weren't adding confidence to that. We were only making him think that he was somehow needed to be fixed, you know. And we have to stop, as family members, we got to find a way to stop doing that. And it's not easy because, especially as parents, that's what you think your job is. So when we stopped doing that and started to ask ourselves different questions, like, or ask him different questions, like, what are your hopes and dreams? What do you want to accomplish in your life? There were some things that we learned along the way from NAMI. My wife is telling me I've only got 3 minutes left, but okay, I'll try to get through the rest of this. So
it's not sunny and 77, George. I'm going to give you 5 more minutes.
Okay, good.
You're dealing with non-Southern California weather, and I want to just acknowledge that.
Thank you. I'm on my third of 7 points, so I'll pick it up. The one thing that helped us more than anything else, there's a book that many of you at NAMI are already familiar with, but if you're not, get it and read it. If you're a family member, it's called I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help, by Dr. Amador. And he didn't learn this from psychology school. He learned it from his brother who had schizophrenia. And it's all about, it's not just about getting the person to do what you think they ought to do. It's not about that at all. It's about how you go about developing a relationship with a person that's a meaningful, trustful relationship. And it even tells you the words to use, how you do that for those of us that need that sort of help. Just a terrific resource. The other thing that we found that was absolutely crucial is to try to, at every time that you're interacting with the person with the condition, to try to assess where they are on what I sort of call the recovery line, which is, like on one end of it is when the person's not doing too well at all, and on the other end is when everything has gone great. By tailoring how we as family members connect with our relatives to where we think they are on that continuum is tremendous, because we can't speak in the same way or have the same expectations for somebody that's really struggling with maybe an acute episode of their disorder, that they would be very much more receptive to, if they were further along in their recovery. And as we all know, this isn't a linear thing. It goes back and forth, because all these things are cyclical. So that's one thing. Adjust what we say and what our expectations are to where that person is. Another thing is that was helpful for us. We recognized, and it's the hardest thing I think for family members to do sometimes, that we can't do something for another person that only they can do for themselves. And it doesn't matter how much we want something for another person, they're the ones that have to embrace that. And so we had to learn to back off and shut up and listen, and listen carefully and respond in an encouraging way. And when we began to do that, then this trust that I've been talking about did build up. There's just a great quote on page 232, because Patrick, my son, also participated in the book, and he said it all. And I'm quoting this directly from the book. "When my parents stopped trying to rescue me, it made me feel like they believed that I could do it." And by the way, we had no clue of that at the time. We were just following what we thought were our best instincts, but it turned out that was the one thing we did that probably was correct. And I just thought that was so powerful, because when we're hovering over somebody, it just reminds them of all the negative aspects of what they're dealing with. When we back off and get on with our own lives, it sends the message that maybe they think I can get better. And I think that was one thing that Patrick said. And finally, the last thing for family members especially is that this is a marathon, not a sprint. I did a poll among our little NAMI group here in Santa Barbara. What are the things I should talk about for communication? But this was the one thing that came up. It's patience, 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 patience. And when you don't have any more patience, you have to be patient a little bit longer, because the changes that will happen as you learn more effective communication skills aren't going to happen all at once. They're not going to happen in a matter of hours or days. Sometimes it's weeks or months, sometimes years. But if we can plant seeds, and if we can provide the hope that perhaps the person has a hard time seeing on their own, that's the one most valuable, I think, thing that we can do as family members. So thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you, George. It's great. And Jordan and I went to Kalamazoo, Michigan, and did an event with Patrick. He was fantastic, and talked about his experience of deepening his relationship with his parents because they had learned to trust him and let go a bit. And his quote, which is also in the book, when you're drowning and somebody jumps out of the boat and they're trying to help you and they don't know how to swim either, it's not a good thing. So I'm going to turn to all the questions from our 443 participants. I'm going to try to group them into big categories. A couple of the questions are on like the really hard things. Dante and Chastity, and again, this is also for George. Let's start with the first question. Have any of you dealt with psychosis and how that impacted your relationship? And so that's a question for both Dante, Chastity, and for George. And, what was that experience like? Because that's a little different than ordinary communication in a relationship.
All right. When I lost my mom, the day I lost her, I about went into a psychosis. I literally would not leave my mother's bed, to the point where my husband had to seriously almost get somebody to help me because it was that bad. My daughter had to get me out of there. It was extremely, I don't even remember everything that happened. He was going to send me, well, actually to the ER if I couldn't get calmed down. So he calmed me down before I had to go to the ER that day.
It was almost like a psychotic break to some degree.
It was to some,
so
yeah.
If I understand the question about the psychosis part, if you're relating it to a psychotic break or a PTSD moment or something like that, or are you relating it to voices, or are you relating it to something else other than the trauma she went through when she passed?
The question, a lot of people with bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder experience delusions, hallucinations, and this is a different kind of emotional experience.
I did. During that time, I even told my husband, I felt like she was there. I mean, literally talking to me. It was a very weird.
It's like the day after she passed and then the funeral. There's 2 episodes that happened during that time because they really touched her emotionally. And
I lost it. I completely lost it, Doc. I completely lost it.
And how did you, Dante, support her through that? Because that's kind of the question. Like there's communication and there's distress and distress tolerance, taking a walk, and then there's dealing with, altered experience like psychosis.
Well, I'm going to tell you what, I took a page from George, and that is the research is very essential. So I read up on the different phases of grief. And so I've heard that grief goes through different phases. And so I got a book and I looked online and I said, so what can I do to help her get through this? I know that the mental health issue is being managed by medication. Okay. But now we got to go past the medication part and see what kind of techniques, what kind of education tools I can use to be that support. So I had to educate myself on that because my wife said beautifully, everyone grieves different. Everybody has a psychosis that's different and it's not consistent. If the symptoms are there, the symptomatics are there, but everyone goes through it differently. And so I'm going to give you a prime example. When my family best friend passed away, his name is Brother Watson, Gene Watson. I talked to him the day before he passed. And hang on, someone's at the door.
Oh my goodness.
Hello.
I have a certified for Murry.
Yes. I'm sorry, guys. We just got to. Yeah.
There's your mail.
Okay.
Oh my goodness.
Dante, why don't we switch to George on this same question? We'll come back to you after you've opened your lottery winnings. George, let's talk a little bit about Patrick was actively hearing voices and very ill for more than a decade, as I understood it from the conversation with you. How did that go for you? What did you learn? Because that's kind of the question. This is a little different than an ordinary father-son communication.
Yeah, it's you're right, and it's exhausting for everybody. First of all, and I think that the thing that we learned from that, I think, was that in the beginning, I think we as family members tend to think about how it impacts us, and when a person is in a sort of a continuing psychotic state for a pretty long period of time, it is exasperating in some ways for people that are living with them. But it took us a while to figure out that, well, it must have been horrible for him too. And I think that once we kind of got that and understood it, and that's one of the things that you learn in Family to Family, by the way, when they do like the exercise, the virtual hallucination exercise in there. There's some of the things in that class that really help you understand what the person's going through. And the reason that that's so important is that there's sometimes when family members feel like they're being, their ill relative is really blaming them, and accusing them. And, we have this saying that if we have to blame something, let's blame the disorder, not the person, And so just us learning that simple lesson through our NAMI support groups and Family to Family and stuff, that was helpful for us because there were some things said, that were hurtful on both sides, I think. both us to Patrick and him back to us. So when we tried to insulate ourselves from some of that emotion that is due to the psychotic, the psychosis that the person's experiencing. And the other thing is, like I mentioned earlier, we had to find a way to relate to him entirely differently. And one of the things that we have to do at that point is we banned all discussion about mental illness during that period, because whatever we said would have been interpreted by Patrick as us manipulating him or trying to control him, rather than let him trying to figure out things on his own. And so, for us, like was said earlier, everybody experiences these things differently. That's sort of the way that we experienced it.
I'm going to answer a couple questions to give you guys a break. Somebody asked, are there resources for siblings? I interviewed a couple of sibling teams, one in their 20s and one in their 60s. And the couple in their 60s, the sisters, took them decades to really figure out how to make their relationship work optimally. And now they're basically best buddies. And, they said it's like fine wine. It really took time for them. But I would agree with you. The sibling experience is under-examined in our mental health dialogue. Yes. And I'm not sure that NAMI has done as much as it ideally could in a perfect world around the sibling experience. Yes. I want to go back to the books George mentioned. Our book is You Are Not Alone. NAMI has the copyright. NAMI gets all the royalties. We've sold over 31,000 copies in 5 months. We're going to be in every Target store in America. PBS is going to do a little program on us in the fall. It's just going to keep coming. People are going to know about NAMI. The expert that George referred to, who wrote the book, I Am Not Sick, I Don't Need Help, he also is featured in our book. So I just want you to know that. So let's take up another question. So this is a variation on the first question. Somebody's actively ill, psychotic, internal stimulation, right? Is there a communication with that? Do you just kind of get treatment? Do you wait for it to pass? And the related question is, were either of you blamed when the other person had active psychosis, and how did you deal with that? I know this from my own childhood with my dad. Right. That's part of the complexity of it. So it's not always easy when you're having the experience to recognize that it's an illness process. You often want to project your distress onto another person, typically the person right next to you over the kitchen table who's trying to love you. So how did you deal with those experiences?
Did you want to talk about it?
I'll let you.
Okay, so I want to give you guys a little comic book backstory like George was talking about. Everyone likes a backstory of one of their characters. And when I dealt with mental health for the first time in my life, I was in the military. Nothing stressed me out there. I finished my enlistment. Everything seemed fine and stable. I worked at UPS. Everything was fine and stable. But some of the things that hit me the hardest were the external factors that stressed me out. Stress at an extreme level, going through divorce, going through litigation of the house and resources that were accumulated over a period of time. Those are the kind of things that really caught up with me and stressed me out to the point where I did have a psychosis. So I know that. But I'm getting to the point about the blaming part. The blaming part was coupled with what I was going through and what my ex was putting me through. And then my parents, having never dealt with mental health issues at all, like George was having to experience with his son. With me being the only son and having the life that I lived, the hopes and dreams that I wanted to have for myself prior to a psychosis, that was very strainful for my parents. I know George can identify with that. And so having that first time psychosis experience, as I'm going to relate to that question, is that the blame comes not from the individual all the time, but it comes from when the parents, based on what they've told me, especially my mom. My mom says, I wish I had done this. I wish I had done this to stop that. I wish I could have been there to save my son from going through this divorce. I wish I could have seen the signs of how these external stressors were really catching up with him and causing him to go down this dark path. And so as my mom and I talked about those things, that's where she blamed some things on herself, and she put a lot of the blame on my ex that was not supportive during that time period when she exploited the mental health crisis I was going through. And so that's the only way I know how to relate to that question, if I've answered it to some degree. As it relates to my wife and I, we both have experienced that same kind of experience with your initial psychosis, your initial breakdown. And that blame that I believe I'm understanding is who caused it. The blame is who could have stopped it.
Yes.
And the blame is how come I didn't see this coming? How come I didn't recognize the signs and say, time out, guys, we're going to fix this right now before it gets worse. Mm-hmm. And so as my mom related that information to me, my dad related that to me, that's the best way I can understand on my end of the question.
Yes.
Is that. Now, my wife, she's never had mental health history, but there's something that happened to her that caused you to have that meltdown. Something caused
whenever I had my psychotic break
yeah.
and everything hit, I was going through abuse. It was a domestic abuse, and the domestic abuse got worse and worse and worse till I had a psychotic break to the point of suicide. Mm-hmm. It was that bad. This is before I met my husband completely.
Wasn't me.
Nope. So when that happened, my whole personality changed. Mm-hmm. I wasn't the same. I'm still not the same as I used to be. Mm-hmm. I'm still not. Mm-hmm. With my husband, like I was saying, with the psychotic part of it, he knows when I'm off. He knows when my moods are off. I know when he's not feeling well mentally. Yeah. I can pick up on it. Mm-hmm. I can ask him, say, "Are you okay today?" And he'll say, "I took my medicine. I'm all right," or something like that to the effect. Mm-hmm. But me, on the other hand, I'm the same way he is. He can pick up on me as well. Mm-hmm. So it's vice versa with us. Mm-hmm. We know when each other is having these issues.
Yeah. So it's not just NAMI strategies and trust. You've also both gotten treatment. And I just want to make it clear.
Yes.
People are writing about family members who have untreated psychosis.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think communication strategies are the job one if a person is really sick, really blaming, really even violent or threatening. The job one isn't the communication, I think, my opinion, but I'm interested in what you think. The job one is to arrange treatment and figuring out how to do that.
You got
to get the help. And the thing is, my wife and I were blessed to get the help we got
our
when
parents.
It happened. Yeah.
Yes, our parents, my mother and father. My dad is a clinical psychologist, and my mom called him up and she said, "Look," whenever I was in the place that I was in, which is Central State, she said, he said, "Look, I'll help you get you on the right path with her." He said, "But you're going to have to do it yourself because I'm so far away." Mm-hmm. So my mom and dad, they worked together to get me treatment, to get me the therapy I needed, to get me on the right track to be where I'm at today.
Got it. Yeah. And was one of the treatments DBT for you, Chastity? Because that was a question.
Yes. Yeah, right. One of mine was.
That was a question, so that's learning how to manage distress. Right.
Yes.
Identifying skills that you can use, research validated, skills-based coping strategy. That was a question that someone had asked.
Yes, that is something
I know we're throwing out some acronyms sometimes, but can we let those over 300 people know what DBT is?
Oh, well, it's over 400 people. It's dialectical.
Right. Okay, sorry, Dr. Duckworth.
I'm so impressed by our attendance. Dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, was invented by Marsha Linehan, who was a psychologist and a behavior specialist. She won the NAMI Research Award in 2015, stood up in front of the whole NAMI community and said, "This is the most important award I've ever won." And Marsha Linehan has won 100 awards. But the idea is the people who are living with it see her. DBT can be hard to get. There aren't enough people trained in it, but it's a course that you take. You have to.
I was blessed to be able to.
Yeah, exactly.
I was blessed to be able to have that treatment. I was blessed.
It saves lives because it teaches coping strategies. So Thank you, Dante. I fall into acronyms all the time. So I want to
I
thank you.
just had to put it out there.
Oh,
I was
you're
in the military
fantastic.
in UPS. They had acronyms for everything, you know.
Oh, I know. Thank you. I appreciate the correction. George, what about this question? So when your son is ill and he's blaming you and he's not thanking you for being loving and supportive, he's blaming you, right? In some way, I'll let you develop this. That lasts for years, not days. And how do you manage that?
It's really a great question, and it is something that most families that have, I mean, it really speaks to this question about what do you do when somebody doesn't want any part of what you have to offer, you know? And it's especially hard, you know, for any relative, but especially for parents, you know, who think they're supposed to be able to solve all these problems. So, you know, the way that I'm interpreting this question is, you know, what do you do when nothing works and you're waiting for the person and trying to encourage the person to be open to accepting treatment, because we all know that treatment works and recovery is possible. But, you know, if a person is under the influence of their belief systems or psychoses, it may be really difficult for a long period of time to get that. So how do you do that? You know, there's a couple of things that that we can do, none of which are universally effective, but it does keep us busy while we're waiting, you know. So one of the things that we found was really important is that, you know, we were perceived eventually that he was part of the struggle was actually dealing with the reality that, you know, maybe I do have this diagnosis and maybe I am going to have to accept treatment for it, and maybe it's lifelong. But you know, that it doesn't. The question is, how do you help them believe that this is not the end of the world? So I think the one thing that families can do is try to find ways to provide hope. And sometimes it's difficult to find something really positive in the person's behavior when they're going through this. But one thing that I noticed with Patrick was that he, no matter what happened to him, whether he was, whatever the crisis was, whether he was in jail or he was in hospital against his will or anything, you know, he didn't give up. He had one single solitary suicide attempt. And after that, he said, that's not my style, you know, that I realized that's not the answer. Mm-hmm. And so the one thing that I was able to say to him that to kind of keep the door open to the light, maybe in the future, was one of the things, and it was true, one of the things that I respected about him is that he never gave up, you know, in the face of horrible things that were going on in his life and that were happening to him. And he always has kind of kept putting one foot in front of the other. And I said, you know, I don't know if I could do that if I was in your position. And that was the one thing that resonated. It was the first time that he said anything that wasn't confrontational, I think, in the previous several months. And he said, thanks, I appreciate that. You know, that was the little glimmer, you know, of hope there. And so
you were acknowledging his experience instead of telling him what he needed to do, right? That's the key.
Yep. But it's hard when you're going through that.
Yes, it is.
It's hard to find something. And here's the thing. People that are in this state, you know, they're not stupid. They're very smart. And if you try to blow smoke at them, they're going to see it in a nanosecond. So whatever you say to them, it's got to come from your heart. It's got to be something that you really believe. And sometimes it takes a lot of thought and process to think about something that's genuine, that you really admire about that person. And, you know, if we think hard enough, there are many things, you know, and the problem is that everybody kind of gets caught up in the perception of the worst outcome instead of the best. And so, you know, I love the way that Patrick has explained it to me. You know, he's been my greatest mentor and teacher, this whole thing. You know, what he said to me about this was that, you know, when I'm going through this, you know, I feel like nobody else in the world understands. But he said, if I just feel like I'm being heard, you know, not that somebody's solving my problem, but just that I'm being heard, you know, it gives comfort. So sometimes we as the family members, the best thing we can do is we can be the custodian of hope when somebody's gone through that process and they're not able, to have that hope for themselves. And, that's sort of, I mean, there's a lot of other things that we did. And the other thing is, you have to follow your instinct, follow your gut. You just keep trying things, and you got to stop doing the things that haven't worked very well and try some new things. And I think as you do that, you get the communications going, even when the person's not fully there, and even when you're feeling blamed and everything. And when you feel blamed, you just try to invoke. We have somebody in our NAMI that calls it a mantra. He said, whenever that happens, he says NAMI, 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 because it reminds him that what we tell them in the support groups is it's the illness, not the person. It's the illness, not the person. It's the illness, not the person. And the more that we do that, then the better we are to realize that is the truth, and that it helps us feel a little bit better as family members, but it also helps us be able to connect better with our relatives.
A bunch of the questions are also dealt with in the book. There's a lot of very specific questions that people are asking. How do you deal if your child is homeless? Well, we, of course, interviewed people who family members are lost to follow-up or living with homelessness. Is cognitive behavior therapy, or DBT, good for schizophrenia? Well, I interviewed the leading thinker in cognitive behavior therapy for psychosis. My son has PTSD. What are the treatments? Well, I asked one of the leaders in PTSD to explain that. The idea of the book is it's lived experience as expertise, but there's also traditional expertise. And for some of these really complicated situations, you might want to, hire a clinician or find somebody who could help you navigate a very specific question, right? I mean, what George, Chastity, and Dante are doing is offering hope, because they figured out a way to make things work. That doesn't mean that there aren't other ways to make things work, because a lot of these situations that you've presented are complex, and challenging. One person wrote, I'm not sure my son will ever get better. I interviewed a man in Connecticut who his daughter lives in a nursing home, and it was an unexpected interview. I gave a talk to NAMI Connecticut, and he just volunteered, and I took all volunteers. I figured in doing 130 interviews, we would find every story. Sooner or later, you would come upon every theme that is important in the NAMI community. And he teaches family to family as a retiree. He does not play golf like all his friends. And he said, I have no expectation that my daughter will ever get better. She lives in a nursing home. She hears voices every day. They don't take Saturday off. They don't take Sunday off. What I do is I teach family to make myself better for her, not to make her better. And if that isn't like the most beautiful, loving spirit, a completely unexpected interview, a random person said, hi, I want to be involved in your book. And Jordan and I listened to this man. We thought, this is so profound, because every journey is different. And this man has made so much meaning of his life. He said, I don't want my daughter to be a statistic. I owe this to her. I am going to give to others. Dante and Chastity, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, my wife always makes a good point about something, so I'm following up on what she told me to say. She says it better. But she said, Dante, I need you to say this.
No, I did not.
I read between the lines, guys. So anyway, she wanted to say something about Dr. Duckworth, Associated Press.
Yes.
And so she said to me, Dr. Duckworth said some kudos about us to the Associated Press, and that we wanted to make sure that everyone knew that we have outlets with our story in it, because Dr. Duckworth did, reference us to Associated Press and likewise, and they put it in some outlets. I was surprised to see our story in the New York Post. So unfortunately, I don't know anybody who reads the New York Post, so it was online newscast. So we had some interest in it from our family members who wanted to see the story, and it was a great privilege. And we thank you for that, Dr.
Yes,
Dr.
we sure do.
We thank you for that opportunity.
Yes.
Well, the idea that living with something is another kind of expertise. It's not the only kind of expertise, but it is a kind of expertise the mental health field has completely ignored for 100 years. And I don't understand why, but NAMI was the only team that would deliver it. NAMI was the only team would deliver real people, use their names to reduce isolation and shame. Here's what worked for me. Here's what worked for my family. So thank you. Before we close, I want people to know You Are Not Alone is available everywhere you buy books. It's at every bookstore. It's at 2,700 libraries. It's on Amazon. All the royalties go to NAMI that got paid to write the book. I don't make a nickel if we sell 1 million copies. But because I so believe in this, and my heart has been broken by so many people who said if only I had found NAMI 5 years sooner, it would have saved my marriage, my relationship. People tell me this on airplanes all the time, and I think, my God, why did it take so long for them to find NAMI? My vision is we're in every Barnes & Noble. We're on Amazon, and if you want to read the reviews, they're quite beautiful. If you happen to buy a book and you like it, consider writing a review. It all goes to support the mission. If you didn't like the book, take a walk. Don't write a nasty review. You don't have to do that. You can find another way. If you don't like the book, give it away. So I want to ask you final comments. What's it been like to be on a panel with 400 people learning from you? And is there anything else you want to share? I'm going to start with George, and then I'm going to close with our class couple and first married couple in the history of Ask the Expert. George, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, Ken, I just want to say a word about that last question about, the lady that said, I wonder if my son's ever going to get better. Because I think that, that's not a small proportion of people that are dealing with the more severe diagnoses. And I can't overemphasize how much I learned from Patrick, from my son, about how he views this. Because in his work, we had this argument once about 15 years ago, probably now, when he was fairly new at the peer specialist job. And he said, I believe 100% everybody can, with a mental health diagnosis, can experience a recovery. And I said, Pat, I can't get my mind around that, because there's people who don't ever completely accept the diagnosis or the treatment. And there's other people that do, but that treatments just don't work very well. How can you say that? He said, no. You're looking at it all the wrong way. He said, the way that I do is I separate it into 2 buckets. He said, what you're talking about is illness. What I'm talking about is wellness and recovery, 2 different things. And I need 2 different sets of tools for this. So he said, the way that you have to think about recovery is it's a journey, not a destination. And that anybody can get to the point where they have, you heard his definition earlier, his definition of recovery is, when I have the life I want to lead. Now that might not be the same life that you as a parent had in mind for that person when they were growing up as a child, or maybe not the same one that they had in mind for themselves. But the fact is that what he was saying is that everybody can embrace what the reality is and find a way to a life that they want to lead. Now, it may not be, to everybody's approval and, every friend and family member, but he really believes that. And I've come to believe it too. And I think that it's going to be different for everybody. And so the notion about whether somebody accepts treatment or not, doesn't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive from using other skill sets that help a person in the daily activities of life, And I think that's what Patrick was saying. It works better, if we have treatment on one side when you need it and as long as you need it.
Both and might be better than either or, but his point was there's another way to think about it.
Exactly.
Right. All right, Dante and Chastity, NAMI's all-time class couple. Let's talk about anything you want to say to close this conversation.
My wife wanted to make a quote on something.
I think that I want to say this. My definition of recovery is being able to help others, to inspire others to do good things, and inspire myself to help others. I think by doing that, that helps me. It keeps me on the right track, saying, you know what, I have to keep my recovery in check, that I have to keep myself in check before I can help anyone else. I have to help myself.
And rely on supports. And
exactly, and rely on supports, and that's part of the quote.
Yeah.
And the therapy, and the medications, and family support.
Mhm.
All those are a combination.
That's right.
By the way, everybody, that's page 166. It's got Chastity Murry on there. She is the second paragraph on page 166 of the book. Little promotion there, honey.
I just wanted to make sure that they heard my definition of recovery.
Yes.
Because it's part of us.
Well, thank you. I want to say thanks to everybody for joining. A question came up, is the book available in Spanish? The publisher is trying to sell it to a Spanish publisher. It has been resold to a Mandarin Chinese publisher, and the book has been resold in the United Kingdom. The tentative title for that book is You Are Not Alone with Scones. That's a joke. It's a tentative title. So it's called You Are Not Alone, but of course there's no NAMI in the United Kingdom. They don't have anything like this community of amazing people. So I just want to acknowledge that. I'm encouraged the publisher to sell the book, resell the book in Spanish. They're working the problem. When I was in Los Angeles, the demand for it was overwhelming. I must have had 50 people ask me, want to get this in Spanish. So it's kind of up to the publisher to figure that out, and they did resell it in Mandarin. So we're working the problem. We're working the problem together. I want to thank all of our staff, all the people who support this Ask the Expert endeavor. None of this is possible without you. And Jordan, are there any slides? Oh, we're coming back to you. Thursday, April 13th, the usual and customary Thursday afternoon time. We'll be talking about the adverse childhood experience and dealing with trauma. And we have a cool expert for that. This is an informational webinar. It's not intended to provide medical advice. You already know that. NAMI's here to support you. The answers, are all around us, and you may find them in people right in our NAMI community. If you feel like donating to things like this, there's an option right there. But it's more important to me that you consider buying this book. This book is now down to $18. You can get used copies for $12 on Amazon. All the royalties go to NAMI. And, we're going to continue to advance the cause because I want people to know about NAMI sooner. Not everybody can find their perfect mate at a NAMI meeting, but everybody should know about us in case they need us. So I want to say thank you, everybody. As a dating site, I don't know how far we're going to get, but we can help a lot of people together. George Kaufmann, Dante, Chastity, Murry, I want to say thank you for everything. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Take good care. And we'll see you next month, April 13th. We'll be talking about the adverse childhood experience study and what we've learned from that. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Ken.